Cool. So what do you want to try? I'm going to go through today is I've tried to keep it to 6. It was difficult. There's a few extras that we'll cover it right at the very end, but 6 sort of is trying to keep it clear. 6 clear distinctions of what it means to be a great board chairman. So for those of you who haven't been on one of these calls before, just a very, very quick overview of what SIRDAR does. So we're one of the leaders in appointing, guiding, and educating directors. That's our focus. That's what we do every day. We work with boards and we work with directors. We don't get caught up in other consulting or other specializations like legal, marketing, or whatever it might be. It's in the boardroom. And we partner with the boards to help them navigate their unique journey, specializing particularly in family and private businesses because we found they often need the most help. But that doesn't stop us doing training for the bigger companies, corporates, and listeds as well. Jenny, if you can just put the poll on, I'd be really interested to see how many chairmen we've got up in the room. So if you can just put the poll, that first poll up, great. So who here is a non-executive chairman? Because that's what we're talking about today, non-executive chairman. And if you're looking to become a chairman or you're just a non-exec director and happy to stay that way, then let me know. Executive chairman. Unusual, but I know they're around. Executive director, wonderful. Shareholder manager, that's really looking at the entrepreneurs, if they're maybe looking to build a board and they're looking to find out a little bit more about what all this chairmanship thing's about. And yes, absolutely, if you're aspiring to become a non-exec director and ultimately chairman, great. And I really hope that what we share today will be useful. So a few more people, just tick the box, come on. And if you're other, then maybe just put what your other is in the chat box. Oh, and welcome from Tanzania. Kishimbo, that's great. Kenya, Middleburg, South Africa, Bertie hello Bertie again. Welcome, thank you for spending your time with us. Zambia, great news, great news. Okay, we'll just close it there. So good spread. So we've got 7 non-executive chairmen in the room. That's fabulous. And 4 non-exec directors. And then and the majority of the rest looks like aspiring non-exec directors. Great. Well, let's hope we can share some information with you that will be useful. Thank you, Jenny. Just getting these polls out the way. So this is what we're here for. We want to make sure that we're not just good directors, that we become great directors. We know how to do our job. We know what's expected of us, what our roles and responsibilities are, so that we can fundamentally change lives. Because if we can help the businesses we're working with grow faster, be more sustainable, more resilient, then we're going to save jobs, we're going to create jobs, we're going to create wealth, and we're literally going to change people's lives, either economically or by the secondary effects of the impact that we have as a business on the communities we're working with. So that's what I really want to make sure that everybody's on board to that concept, that they really want to make a difference and really want to put the effort in, the time in to be better directors, to be great directors. So quick overview, what is the role of a director? Anyone who's been on one of my calls before should know the answer to this. There's 3 words I'm looking for. We'll talk about all of them later. 3 words. What is the role of a director or the board of directors? Anyone who has a guess, throw it into chat. Oh, let's put these thinking caps on. This is a thinking engagement. This is not a listening engagement. Well, I can listen, but yes, we need to be involved. So one is strategy, the other is leadership, and the third of those 3 is governance. And we'll be touching on all of those because they are absolutely critical as a director for you to be skilled in all of them, because you are the leader of this team called the board. And the other piece is, well, what is governance? So governance is about the policies and procedures. Now, as chairman, you obviously don't need to be an expert in policies and procedures, but you need to at least be able to communicate the value to the organization, because those are the tools that we're using as a board to help the company move forward with proper process, with proper policies, so that we're not having questions coming back to management, coming back to the board all the time about what we do. We've documented the way we do things around here, and that's obviously a key part of what we do as a board. And then just to sort of give sense for those of you who may or may not be aware, or to the extent you need to be, about the difference between the relationship of shareholders, the board, and management with the company. Because I'm finding more and more that the more people I speak to, the less that this relationship difference is understood. So it's worth knowing and understanding and realizing that in the boardroom, you need to be really clear that the shareholders are separated from the board. That's why there's a hard line. So if a shareholder discussion comes up in the board, key role of the chairman is to make sure that that's pushed outside the board into a separate shareholders meeting. And also understand that the shareholder relationship with the company is very much a selfish relationship. In other words, we're looking for a return on investment. So it's also important as a board to understand, what do shareholders want? So that as a leader of the board, I can guide the organization, I can guide the board to help deliver on those expectations and balance them against all of the other expectations of all the other various stakeholders. Because this relationship that the board has with the company is selfless. We need to be doing this work with not thinking of ourselves. This is not a power trip. This is about being selfless and doing everything we possibly can in the best interests of the company. And as I said, as the chairman, as the leader of this team, we need to make sure that we are leading with those values. We're demonstrating that we're doing everything to be selfless. We're not seeing this as some kind of way of getting power. And the management is a confusing sometimes relationship, because there's a contract in there and it's a selfless sometimes and selfish on others. But the key thing is, make sure you understand that being on the board, being a director, is a selfless relationship. And then we've put this up on, I think, probably every presentation I've done, but to understand that the high performance director is one who's obsessed with creating meaningful economic impact, we talked about. And furthermore, such a director is not afraid to have tough conversations. So I'll talk about that a little bit more later. And one of your duties as a director is to do those mundane tasks. That care, skill, and diligence you need to apply is about those mundane tasks that you have to do on a board. And the board as a whole, excuse me, is about a rhythm. It's about a methodology. It's about a process, and holding the business accountable to a level or higher that it's never been held before. So if you look at a lot of the governance failures, they've been because the board hasn't held management, and particularly the CEO, accountable. So that's a key part of the role of the board. So that care, skill, and diligence, so making sure that we are approaching decision-making properly. We're taking care when we are thinking things through, taking care in the way we prepare the papers that we submit to the board, etc. And taking care that everyone's been heard, that we've brought everyone in this conversation together. And we've got the skill, we've got the commercial acumen. We've been doing self-development training to make sure that we are in a space where we have a high EQ, where we can stay calm, we can present ourselves in a professional manner. And all of that preparation and attention to detail is absolutely critical. So it's that utmost good faith towards the company, and those fiduciary duties are to act in good faith, act in the best interest of the company, avoid conflicts of interest. And again, a lot of the examples that I'll show in the next couple of slides are about that conflict, that lack of accountability. They're not doing everything in the utmost good faith towards the company. There was some kind of personal agenda, some way of making more money for themselves or for the shareholders or for some other service provider, and exercise them powers for purpose which they were granted. So making sure that we understand what the role is and we don't go outside those boundaries. We don't start to take decisions which are not ours to take. So why is this whole so important? Why are we here? Why are we doing this thing? Why are we bothering to train ourselves up? Because of this massive failures that are happening based on governance issues. So Enron was accounting fraud. So they were in cahoots with their auditors. The auditors were also consultants. They were getting paid both ways. So who's holding who accountable in that conversation? The directors had financial ties to the business. So there was massive conflicts of interest. And the management weren't being held accountable by the board, again, because of those conflicts of interest. They were allowed to go into risky investments or implement risky accounting practices Parmalat, lack of independence. Board members were friends and family. Volkswagen, same thing. Board members were friends and family. No one was holding the CEO or the organization accountable at the level that it should be, because they're all too pally-pally, too in each other's pockets. So we're, again, accounting fraud in Parmalat's case, and Volkswagen very much a lack of accountability. Be able to make decisions without someone saying, I don't think that's a good idea, because they've just got way too much power. The primary shareholder has the loudest voice in the boardroom, and all of the rest of the board members are family or close friends, so they say, yes, absolutely, let's do what he says. So let's not build organizations where those loopholes, as it were, are available. So one of the most, this was from the Financial Director magazine in UK, one of the most obvious reasons for corporate failure is a lack of an effective board, which is what we're talking about, plenty of warning signs, clear skill limitations, absence of experience, core business areas, inability of non-execs to hold senior executives to account. So most, if not all of you, either are a director or a non-exec director or want to be. It's really critical you understand that that is a fundamental part of the job. We have to be able to have those difficult conversations. We have to be able to hold the senior executives to account. Just because they've been very successful, just because they've got a big public image, we cannot rely that they know everything. We have to hold them accountable. We have to test them. We have to make sure that we're not missing something important. That's part of our responsibility, key part of our responsibility. And I love what Margaret Heffernan had to say, a little bit non-PC, I guess. So this cozy golf club boards where everyone's chummy and see eye to eye tend to be disastrous. Harmony matters more than the work. Equally, boards are at their best when they do not feel so beholden to the CEO. And it's that beholden to the CEO bit that catches us out so often. And an ineffective board, sorry boys, it's full of men who all went to the school together, studied the same subjects, and broadly see eye to eye on everything. And it was one of the questions we asked in our 2021 non-exec director survey report that's just been issued. So please put that in the chat, Jenny, so that everyone can download it if they haven't done so already. One of the questions was how diverse is the board based on ethnicity, based on gender, because we want to try and make sure that we're not all boys together from the same school. There is value in that diversity. There is value in having 30, 40, 50% or more of your board made up by women. There's a value in differences of opinion. That's what should be happening at board level. We should be challenging the status quo. We should be asking difficult questions. So a high performance board is made up of directors, team, and a methodology. And we'll go into all of those in a little bit more detail. But the key thing that often gets forgotten is this board should be operating as a team. This is not a tick box exercise. We need to be working together. We need to be reaching consensus. We need to be making decisions, and then we can get on with what the business is supposed to be doing properly. We're not taking shortcuts. So it's important that we have a concept of this board as a team, and that we work with the ExCo, which should be working together as a team. And we apply a methodology, and as part of the chairman's role is to make sure that methodology is applied in the boardroom, but executive, maybe the methodology must be applied in the rest of the organization. But you need all three. That's how you get the proper value of an effective board. So I was just trying to think who's the ideal chairman, and I actually thought it'd probably be better just to have someone who's a fictional character. It's easier to cover up their faults because they're not all over the papers. So is Yoda from Star Wars the ideal chairman? Well, he's certainly got some of the traits which I would expect a good chairman to have, but if you dig into it, there's a few other failings which are probably not quite so appropriate. But leadership. So are we demonstrating in the board as a chairman leadership? Are we wise? Are we using our knowledge, our learning, and applying it? Understand how to apply it, understand the bigger context of how to apply it. It's not just learning. We know how to apply it. We've got experience that's relevant. And I'm not just talking about experience in the specific industry on which you were board of. In fact, there was an article I was reading recently where they were saying that actually that's a hindrance, and there's something we've always tried to avoid when we've been placing boards from a SIRDAR context. If we're placing a director onto a board, we would rather choose someone that's not from your industry, because otherwise what happens is the conversation becomes way too operational, and we're starting sparring with each other about how much we know about the industry that we're in. Whereas as soon as you have non-exec directors who are not part of the industry, but have broad business experience, have a broad understanding how this governance thing works, have a broad understanding of strategy, then it's a different game. We start making different types of decisions. We start acting like a board and not just an extension of the operations. Calm and fearless. So we need to be the Yoda in the room. We need to be the one who's not reacting to whatever the outburst is, whatever the emotion is that's flowing around. We need to remain calm, but we need to be fearless because we need to have those critical conversations, which we talked about. And I think it's also important to have a methodology. We've said, and I think definitely a sense of humor, because when things get heated, there's definitely an opportunity or a need to just break the ice, just calm things down a bit, just change the subject, let everybody have a moment to catch their breath before we move on. So if you're stuck for a role model as a chairman, then I've given you an example. Work with it. So the first one, one of my 6, independence. So as we've mentioned, in those companies that failed dismally, a large part of the problem was lack of independence. So when I'm looking at a board and thinking about placing someone on the board, my first step is usually to try and find an independent chairman for that company. I know from my personal experience of serving on a board, there's just such a huge value of being independent in that role, because it just gives you more space. It gives that less emotional connection with what's going on, etc., etc. And it's been backed up by our survey. So page 4 of this 2021 non-exec directors survey report, despite being seen as value drivers, only 25% of boardroom composition in each business is represented by an independent director. But 88% of the respondents who have one said that's the last person they'd want to remove. In other words, they're the most valuable person in the boardroom. So why don't we have more? And boards with at least one independent director are evaluated as significantly more effective than boards without independent directors. So it's going to impact your profitability. It's going to impact the effectiveness of your board. This is real. This is proper value that we're bringing by having that independent perspective. And it was interesting looking at what's been happening in the States, because a lot of directors are almost encouraged to be shareholders. And an awful lot of CEOs become chairman or are chairmen simultaneously, which means they obviously don't have independence. So it's difficult for a board led by a CEO to serve as a check on that CEO. Absolutely. How do you hold yourself accountable? You can't. So you need to be separate. You need to be distinctly separated from the organization. It's just as problematic if you used to be the CEO and now you're the chairman, because you're also still way too connected to that organization. We're probably involved in the employment process of that CEO as well. So the chair is responsible and represents the board, while the CEO is responsible for and is the public face of the company. They are the person who's running the operations of the company. They're responsible for making sure the company operates in the way that's been decided, defined, and led by the board. The chairman is responsible and represents the board. So it's quite a powerful combination if there is that separation, as I'll talk to you a little bit later. If you both go into a PR exercise, it demonstrates commitment. So whatever the message is you're trying to make to the market, and particularly important if you're trying to say, sorry, if you've got both the CEO who's seen and everyone understands is in charge of the operations, and you've got the chairman who's seen and everyone understands is in charge of the board that's driving the strategy. If you bring them together, it's an incredibly powerful combination, and it really demonstrates that what you say is what you mean. Again, another small excerpt from the survey. The vast majority of board members surveyed indicate that directors do not receive equity, which is fantastic. So for the people we surveyed in Africa, the vast majority don't have some kind of equity. They're not shareholders, which mean they've got some degree of independence. So that's really encouraging to see. I couldn't find the stats in time for this session about how many board members in the States have shareholders, but I'm pretty sure it's a lot higher than that. So what do we want from an independent non-executive chairman? What does independence mean? It means you don't represent a shareholder, you haven't been appointed by a shareholder. So it's often difficult to find people who are like that, which is why we ended up having a director database to try and make sure companies could find someone who was truly independent. There is a bit of leeway. So if you have a small shareholding, I'm guessing that this is largely based on things like listed companies where you might own a few shares, but it's such a small percentage, it doesn't really mean anything. Whereas in a private company, as soon as you have shares in a private company, I think there's a likelihood that there will be some kind of conflict in thinking, and you may not be acting truly independently. So rather aim for zero, but if there's obviously a very small, insignificant shareholding that has no material impact on that individual director's wealth, then there's obviously leeway there. Not employed by the company for at least 3 years. The reason why that's important is because if you've been employed recently, you still have relationships with the people in the team. Almost if you've been at a senior level, which is with the experience we're looking for to bring to the board, then you've probably had quite a close relationship with people who are in the room, who are on the board. After 2 or 3 years, then those relationships start to not so much break down, but they become less close. You're not entirely aware of what's going on at the same level in the operations. So it's an important break. It's an important separation of roles. Arguably, for the chairman, you want to try and make sure that someone who hasn't been involved in the organization at all. But again, it's very much subjective in circumstances, and there may be all kinds of reasons why that particular individual is going to add massive value as the chairman. Not a family member or executive, absolutely. We've seen various examples of why it's important to make sure you don't have family members, particularly as the chairman. Not a professional advisor or a group, so don't have a representative of your audit firm or your legal firm on the board, and absolutely not as chairman. And free from any other contractual relationships. So I think Enron, there was all kinds of relationships and contracts and consulting going on that was making it very difficult to split out the conflict. But certainly, absolutely, if you want to be seen as being independent on a board, then no other contractual relationships. And do not receive remuneration linked to company performance. So it was also interesting in that supplemental to see that very few people had any direct remuneration linked to the performance. If they had some kind of additional revenue income on top of the straight director's fees, it was based on a per meeting additional like expenses kind of per diem or something along those lines. So it was still linked to the showing up in the boardroom rather than linked to their performance and the share price and all of those other kinds of things. And the main difference being that if we are independent, we are not bringing in this understanding of the business. We're bringing in something else. We're expecting the executives to do that. Another reason why it's so difficult if you were the CEO before, or you are a CEO and you're a very strong CEO, to let go of all of that operational kind of thinking when you're sitting in the boardroom, because this is a different team. It's not about telling people what to do. It's about asking questions so that we work it out as a team, what is the best thing to do. And we're not expecting anyone who's independent to bring an understanding of the business. That's what the executive directors are for. That's the value of bringing those executive directors into the room. So we want to make sure we're bringing the best executives into the room. And also to ensure that the executives, obviously their responsibility is to make sure the papers are accurate and a true reflection. And it's that difficulty. So we don't want lots of executives in the room because it's really difficult to balance this hat of what's in the best interest of them management or what's best interest of the company as a whole. So if you have a majority of executives, then your majority of your perspective is going to be based on what's in the best interest of management. Simple. So you want to make sure the board is made up of a majority of independents, so you get a majority of the perspective is what's in the best interest of the company. And this comes back to, where does governance come from? Where does this word come from? So as leaders, we want to make sure that we are steering and piloting the ship. That's what the board's job is. We are the captain and the officers in this scenario. So we're making sure that we understand the capabilities of this vessel. We understand what this vessel was built for. So the shareholders have put the money in, they've created this vessel, created this ship. So is it a passenger ship? Is it a cargo ship? Is it shallow water? Is it deep water? What are its capabilities? What is its primary purpose? And then we need to make the tactical decisions. We need to set the strategy. Where are we going to? What's the course we're going to follow? And then hand that over to the crew to make it happen. The helmsman's not an officer. The helmsman's fulfilling the wishes of the captain and the officers. They're setting the course, they're driving the ship in a particular direction. The crew's making sure that it happens. So it's those separations of duties are quite well defined in the earliest examples of where this word governance came from. But we seem to have lost that separation in a lot of cases. We don't keep it clearly enough in our organization. So it's a good idea to take it back to that level and start thinking about how we split them up more. So what is one of the critical things? The second one is leadership, and very much a servant leadership perspective, which is why I mentioned earlier, this is a selfless relationship with the company. This is not about gathering and creating and being in a powerful position. This is about authority, coming from a place where you don't have faith that you know the answer. You know, because you've been there, you've done this, you've lived it, you've demonstrated those characteristics. And then it gives you empathy, listening ability, stewardship, all of those kind of things you need to have, particularly as a chairman. As I said before, this is not about telling, this is about asking difficult questions. This is about having the difficult questions. Being the person in the room who says, no, really, guys, we shouldn't be going there. Let's dig into that a little bit more. Not just because the CEO said it's a good idea, rolling with it. We've got to challenge things. And being a director, selfless, chairperson must lead by example. So if you are the chair, you need to demonstrate that this is what this is all about. This is a 24/7 deal. You are giving of yourself whenever necessary to the company. Tough, but that's where it is. It's very much about time, which we'll cover in a minute. And being the best prepared person in the room and developing, coaching and mentoring of the CEO and the team. So your role is leader of a team of equals, but it's very much that selfless leadership where you're helping and supporting everybody in that team to grow and the organization as a whole to grow. So it's mentoring because you've been there, done that before, or it's coaching because you're helping someone unpack something they're stuck with and they have the answer, they just can't see it. So wisdom and experience. We want people who are good general business thinkers. They've got a good bit general business knowledge across marketing, legal, finance. They've had experience. They may not have served in those particular departments, but they know what they're for. They know what they're about. So you can get a clearer understanding of what this machine looks like and what levers to pull to make changes, which is where the strategy bit comes in. Because remember, we talked about this is the key role of a board. It's leadership, strategy, and governance. So we should be driving the strategy, which means we need to be strategic thinkers. And again, if you don't have a chairman who's a strategic thinker, you're not hiding to nothing because they're leading the team. So you've got to be the best of all the people in the boardroom. You've got to know as much, if not more than anyone else, about the governance aspects. You must be driving the strategy at every meeting, etc., because that's the role of the board. And well versed in all aspects of governance, which we talked about, and ideally must have led a business that's of similar or greater size. Look, there are examples where we've had quite young chairmen who've done a really good job, but they've brought a particular skill or a particular perspective to that company that it didn't have. But on average, the safest bet is to have a chairman who's been to the next level of wherever your company is going, because then they can see over the horizon, they can see what might be coming. They can anticipate what this business needs to do to get through the storm. And be able to read the room. So there's got to be some kind of understanding of what are the personality profiles in the room, and how do they interrelate with each other, and when are they going to react with each other? So what are the places where individuals are going to be challenging each other, and maybe facilitate that because there are opposing opinions that need to be heard. And if it's destructive, the knowing and understanding what those individuals need and what their strengths are, so you can bring them back into that space of adding value. And know when to push, when to lighten the mood. This is getting way too hectic. This is starting to get a bit tense. We need to change the subject, back it off. The guys, let's take 10 minutes, come back. This is what we're going to talk about next. Let's focus on the problem. Get a drink, do whatever you need to do to just chill, and then we'll come back and pick up the conversation. Or throw in a joke if someone's just getting way too intense on a particular topic. But as part of your role as a chairman, you are leading this meeting, you are leading this team, you are leading this group to be doing whatever they best can for the company. So it's from terms of knowing, this is what we use as the governance compass. So it's the 8 areas of governance that we see that a board should be looking at from a strategic perspective. So as the chairman, you need to understand all of these. You're not expected to be a specialist in any particular one, but it's useful. But you must understand all of them. You must have some experience in setting strategy and direction, in building and understanding what the organization's culture is. Having built a team, an effective leadership team, have an effective leadership structure, so you can bring that experience to bear in the boardroom and help and support the company to do better. Understand what stakeholder engagement means and what a stakeholder list of template or matrix looks like. Understand the importance of getting a statement of intent from shareholders, because if you don't understand what the shareholders want in terms of returns, how on earth as a board are you going to deliver against that mandate and keep them happy so they're going to want to put money in the future when you need it? And then risk management and compliance. All too often the board focuses mostly on risk management and compliance, or not at all. So entrepreneurial businesses are very good at not looking at risk management and compliance. Larger corporates get the bad reputation by looking mostly at risk management and compliance. It's one of 8 components. It's important, but it's not the only thing that's important. And then obviously making sure you're following and monitoring the financial results. What gets monitored and measured gets changed and seen and moved. And evaluation and improvement is that annual check-in. Have we checked that we have got the right policies? Have we checked that they're still current? Have we checked that the legal framework that they were based on is still valid, or has changed? Or if it's changed, then we need to make sure we update those policies. When is that happening on your board calendar? So this becomes your board calendar. Once a year, we need to have a conversation about all 8 of these areas. Otherwise, we're missing something. We're missing something important. And this piece about having someone who's in the leadership role of the board is thinking about what phase is the business that you're on the board of at right now. Is it in that phase of, we've got some direction, but we're really struggling with that crisis of autonomy. The founder, the leaders are still got their hands in too many places. We need to go through a process where we can start to move them up to the level where they're in much more of a strategic role, thinking about and working on the business rather than in it, and have delegated the key responsibilities to other people. Is that where the business is at, or are we now on the place where we've got the delegation going, but we just haven't got the control set up? So it's getting too big and it's getting too spread out, and we're losing track of who's controlling what, and our processes and policies, and possibly training and understanding of what the strategy is, etc., needs to be fixed. Is that where the business is at? But wherever it's at, you need to make sure that as many of your boards of directors as possible have been through that phase, have lived through that phase, and have come out the other side and can tell the story about what things to avoid, what dangers they've seen that they can see happening. Is that standing on the shoulders of giants, making sure you've got people on the board who've been there, done that, don't make the same mistakes, learn from them. And that's what I mean about making sure you've got someone, particularly in the chairman role, who's been at the next level of the journey of your board And if your board has got very little understanding of governance, then make sure the chairman's got a solid understanding of governance. If the company's got a really good product set, but they haven't got anybody that understands how to grow it to the next level, 10x it, go to new markets, whatever it might be, then make sure you've got people in the boardroom who can take you there. And that could be the chairman as well. And then the profiling tool is, there are plenty out there. We just happen to use Contribution Compass, but it's a way of understanding who is around the table and what are their strengths. Are they activating, which means they're going to bring new ideas, they're going to bring solutions easily, that's the way they think. Are they inspiring, which means they see the issues with the people in the organization, they have a clear understanding about how to inspire people, how to lead people forward, etc. Sustaining is about a good understanding about how systems work and how processes work and why they're important. How do you retain clients by delivering a consistent product, etc. And then the last piece is refining, which is about that analytics, about the data, about the cold hard facts. All of those perspectives are really, really critical in a boardroom. They may be weighted in different ways in other operational aspects, but at the board level, we need to make sure this team that we're working with covers all the bases, that naturally we understand the different areas of what is happening in the business, and we don't miss something important in that critical moment, in that stressful situation where things need to be decided quickly. So then the fourth part, calm yet fearless. So independence helps, obviously. It's much easier to stay calm if you are unemotionally attached to how the business got to where it got to, because you weren't part of the founding team, you weren't part of the management team that developed the particular way of doing things, developed the product potentially. So you can look at it from an independent perspective, you can look at the facts, you can look at the situation from the outside in and say, look, that's really good, but that's way out of date, or that needs to be fixed because it's just not working, whatever it might be. It's so much easier to see it when you're not in it. You can take that high level view and look down on it and see where the moving parts are not moving quite so smoothly. And then you've got to communicate that with the people who are involved, emotionally attached, who've been doing all this work for years, even decades, and now you have to find a way of helping them, supporting them, telling them that this needs to change. And I suppose that might be a tell, but usually try and approach it from asking lots of questions. So they go, okay, I get it. I see we've got a problem. Let's fix it. So it's that high EQ. So lots of self-development to help clear those emotional triggers. It's so much easier if you don't react to it the way that someone's coming at you, because you've dealt with whatever emotional triggers you had in the past. So you can just stay calm, you can stay centered, you can bring everybody else's level of emotion and less energy down, because you are not reacting. You are that yogi in the moment. Not afraid to have the difficult decision or make the difficult decisions. Again, if you're fearless and you know what you know and you've been there before and you're not afraid to make a difficult decision because you've done it before, as long as you've got all the facts you need, you've done all the diligence you need, you've taken the care, skill, and diligence through the process of making a decision, then let's do it. There's nothing else to think about. We cannot guess what all the particular permutations might be. We've done the best job we can, and we're comfortable, particularly as the chairman, I'm comfortable to say, guys, we need to make a decision. Here's the options. Let's do it. Unless someone knows something else, something that we've missed, and it's important, we need to go back to discussion level. But we need to move forward, we need to make decisions. All too often boards just hum and haw and never actually make the big decisions they need to make. And part of that is not being afraid to have those difficult conversations. So Crucial Conversations book by Patterson, Glennie, McKillen and Switzler, really good book to have on your bookshelf, particularly as a director, because there's always going to be a situation where you have to make and have a crucial conversation. And then we move on to methodology. So what is the system we're using? What is the process we're using for making sure that we get through all of these different board meetings and we end up with an effective board? So as a chairman, do you have pre-board meetings? I will ask that question. So of those of you, I think there were half a dozen of you who have or are a chairman, who has a pre-board meeting with the MD? I'd be really interested to find out. And I suppose the question, if it's no, is if not, why not? Have you ever tried it and it didn't work? be useful just to understand that perspective. So just put it in the chat box quickly. Is anybody who's been a chairman, do they have pre-board meetings? Very honest. Thank you, Christina. Sometimes. Sharaz, yes. Luke, yes. Great. They can be, and if done properly, are a very valuable tool, because you need to make sure, because you work as a team, that the chairman and MD have a clear understanding of what you want to get out of the next meeting. So if you haven't been through the matters horizon, you haven't worked through the strategy calendar to see what is the next topic we should be talking about, if the MD hasn't at least thought about what is the key decision I need made or the support I need to move forward after this meeting, and had that discussion and bounce the ideas around with the chairman, then you waste an opportunity to have a really, really effective board meeting. So you need to be crafting this agenda. And to make sure you do the pre-board effectively, it's also important to have an agenda, standard agenda, but have an agenda for that pre-board meeting so you don't miss a step. And I keep mine in a file above my desk. I don't refer to it every time, but when I need to, it's really useful to have it there. Oh, no, we missed that step. Come on, we need to do better. So have the pre-board meetings, follow some kind of agenda, and put together a properly thought through agenda for your meeting. Way too often these agendas are identical to the meeting before and the meeting before that, meeting before that. And they typically have attendance, minutes, matters arising, and maybe one or two other things. But that's about it. We want to make sure we've got a strategic topic in there somewhere. And it needs to be at the beginning if possible, as everyone's fresh. We need to make sure we've thought about what are the key 3 or 4 decisions we have to make at this board meeting in order to move forward. And an alarm bell should be ringing if you don't have decisions to make, because then you're obviously not thinking far enough ahead, you're not interrogating things enough, and maybe not asking the CEO or MD the right questions to unpack where things might be stuck. And as I said, at least one strategic topic. And key questions. So this is another one for everybody who's a chairman. Oh, I can get my cursor back. If a board paper is added to the agenda less than 48 hours before the meeting, do you reject it? Anyone brave enough to answer this one? Yeah, it depends. That is a good answer, because if it's critical and we know and understand what the topic is, and it's just you're waiting for the last bit of paper so that we can cover it on the board meeting, different story. If it's something that's quite new and you actually need time to read it, think about it, maybe ask some questions of management or the leadership team, then no, because I cannot, as an independent director, contribute. I cannot be sure that I'm making the right decision, or I'm even engaged and involved in the discussion properly, if I hadn't had time to process the information. So it's something as a chairman we need to be really conscious of. If that paper's arriving, and particularly if they're arriving frequently, the day before or the night before, or on the morning of, we need to start setting those rules in the board and say, guys, this is just not good enough. We can't prepare as non-exec directors if this stuff's coming so late. We cannot contribute to the discussion if stuff's coming so late. From now on, the next meeting, if something's not within at least 24 hours, I'm going to kick it out of the agenda and then start to move it back. Then it forces you to have the pre-board meeting. It forces you to have a discussion with the MD and understand what needs to be in the board papers and what the timelines are for those papers being ready, etc. But it makes the board meeting so much more effective. It makes independent directors feel so much more valuable if they've got 3 or 4 or 5 days before the meeting to actually read this stuff, digest it, do some research, and make sure that they're contributing properly in the board meeting. And the test that you should be using as a chairman to check if someone has read the papers is ask them, say, right, the paper we're about to discuss, 3.1, Joe, can you just give us a quick summary of what your perspectives is on this decision or discussion? And if there's any fumble, quickly read it, then hopefully they'll get the message that they need to prepare more. And the more often you do that, the more likely the other directors are to actually prepare properly. But you need to make sure you've prepared, you've read all the papers, so that you can with confidence say, management report taken as read. Now, there's a couple of things I just wanted to ask you, MD, but I wasn't really clear on, and I see there's an opportunity there which you don't seem to have picked up on. So let's just go through those. Anybody else pick anything up from that report? It's a whole different conversation from a 20-minute presentation from the MD on a report that we should have already read. So it's those kind of things, those little nuances make a massive difference, and they should be part of the way you do things. They should be part of the methodology you use. So usually no, if impactful, thank you, would not encourage it, need time to apply themselves, absolutely. Allow the opportunity to the CEO at the least to address the subject, and then you decide whether you continue. That's also not a bad idea. But I think the starting point needs to be, we will reject it unless there's a really good reason not to. And I think all too often it's the other way around. So during the meeting, do we follow a clear methodology? Is our agenda built in the right way? And do we take the minutes as a chairman, or guide the meeting well enough for someone else to? So just think about that for a moment. Ideally, minutes should not be taken by the chairman because you are guiding the meeting. If you're writing notes, you can't be guiding the meeting because you need to be looking out, see who needs to make a comment, making sure that you've given people an opportunity to speak, etc. It's guiding the meeting. Minutes needs to be separate to that. The other thing is, if you take minutes based on a recording, they're much more likely to be accurate, but it's really difficult for the person to take good minutes that don't end up in 40 pages of verbose stuff that no one can work through if you haven't led the meeting in such a way that it's clear when there are pauses. You're following the agenda. You're summarizing at the end of each section, so that the person taking the minutes knows clearly what the action items are, clearly what was decided, and has got some idea what was discussed in the middle, because you might have just summarized that as well. And so thank you, Joe, for your contribution and for your point. That was really well made. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, whoever else in the board meeting. My brain's seized up. Thank you for that perspective. I think we've talked about it any length. Did you have any other points that you thought of since that stopped us going forward? Okay, no, you're happy, fantastic. In summary, we decided blah, 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 blah. And the next action step is for the CFO to draw up the papers and send them around via round robin for us to sign. Is everybody happy? That's what we've decided. Yes. Quick glance around the room. Absolutely. Let's move on. That's so much easier to minute than if there isn't that pause, if we haven't taken that moment to summarize carefully, we haven't taken that moment to check in with everybody. And then when the minutes arrive, we go through them. Yep, that's what I said. Yep, that makes sense. Yeah, that looks about right. We can go through it quickly because it's concise. It's got enough detail. It's not a whole verbose thing. It's got the actions and the decisions clearly mapped out. So we can use it as a useful legal document going forward. And that all comes from the way the chairman runs the meeting and summarizes and makes sure that people are heard and that all the perspectives are dealt with, and we have consensus at each point. We shouldn't be voting. We should be driving all the time for consensus. And if there's obviously a big problem with getting that consensus, then we need to take the time, come back tomorrow or come back next week, have a special meeting to go through that topic, because we need all more information, or we need to check some facts before we can move forward. But yes, first thing, I highly recommend that as a chairman, you stop taking minutes as soon as possible and find someone who's qualified to do it instead. And do you allow other directors to have a voice? Can you act independently? So it's a skill. It's something you need to learn, develop, etc., to make sure you don't react and you can take a step back and understand the tools of how you calm the situation down. So chairman writes the minutes with their actions and their words by following the agenda, keeping to the timing, summarize. So critical. And then the last part is after the meeting, how quickly can you get the minutes out? If they're out in more than a week, then I, as another independent director, have probably forgotten most of what was discussed. And I certainly can't remember the nuances of what dissent was and whether it was resolved or not, and whether the decision was actually completely accurate or not. It maybe looks right, but not sure. We need to get those minutes out quickly. And as in directors, the rest of the directors, and we need to start by the chairman, I know I'm my worst enemy in that, is as a chairman being the first to read those minutes and the first to get back to the board secretary, so that we can get them accurate, complete, and proper legal representation of what was discussed in that meeting. And the last one, time. As a chairman, we need to have time to do this job properly. We need to have time to coach and mentor the CEO. We need to have time to share our networks. One of our key value adds as being on a board is to share our networks, and we need to lead from in front. We need to be involved potentially in PR exercises. As I said, if there's something major going on, then we need to be standing aside and standing next to and supporting the CEO in those moments. And we need to be able to dedicate the time to doing that, because we are doing everything in the best interest of the company. We need to be there to celebrate too. We need to be going to some of the, at least one of the staff meetings a year, and celebrating as a representative of the board with the team and asking for feedback. So all of those things take time. So it's visiting the teams, visiting the businesses. I was getting very frustrated during COVID because I wasn't able to even go and visit a factory or even meet with a lot of the directors I was working with face to face for the first time. It's really important to get a sense of what the business feels like on the ground, to actually chat to a few of the people who were in the supervisor role or on the shop floor or whatever the situation is in that company, and just get a sense of where they're at, what's happening. If you had a moment to tell the board something, what would it be? Now, here's your chance. I'm standing in front of you. Give it a go. You'll hear a lot of stuff that you probably won't hear in the board meeting, and it's usually quite important. And that availability 24/7. I had an experience in 2019. The company I was working with, I was on the board of, was very close to either going to business rescue or going to be liquidated. It was hectic times. And I was on holiday in Scotland, standing in the car park when my phone rang. And it was the MD saying, "I've had enough, I'm resigning." At that point, I'm the only person on the planet he can phone, because there's nowhere else in the organization to phone. But you can't just say, "Oh, cheers, I'll see you in 2 weeks' time on a holiday." You've got to do something about it. It's 24/7. Doesn't matter whether it's 3 a.m. or whatever it is. You, as the chairman of the board, need to be available and need to help and support the business to make the right decision, which means you need to do it when it needs to be done. So in summary, be independent. Try to be the person that's either acting independently if you can't be completely independent based on your history or connection with a company, or make sure that you're joining boards that are not in your industry, or that are not friends of yours, or that are not someone you know really well in some other professional capacity because you've done work for them in the past. Learn, train yourself, do whatever self-development you need to get to the space where you can be calm. Read as much as you can, learn from as many other people as you can, so you can move in a space where you can be fearless. You can be the person that takes a decision because you've thought it through properly and you're not afraid to move forward. So it's about training. It's about being the chair in the meeting, being that leader, be the person who commands that room, that people respect, but you listen to everybody. You don't tell them. So you don't tell, ask, build consensus. Don't speak, listen. Follow a methodology, some way of doing things to keep it consistent so everybody knows how the process works. In every part of our business, it makes a massive difference. So we've got some kind of process, some kind of methodology we follow. So board's no different. Be the best prepared person in the room. It's a primary part of your job. If you aren't, then how on earth are you going to hold anyone else in the board accountable? Because immediately their little voice is going in there, "Yeah, but he didn't read that paper. There's no way he read that," etc. So be the best prepared person in the room. Difficult, but it's part of the job. Give others a space to contribute. You should not be the loudest voice in the room. You should be the quietest voice in the room, making sure everyone else gets heard. Everyone's perspective is brought to the table so we can get a much more complete decision and discussion process happening. Summarize, summarize, summarize. I've said it before. If you want good quality minutes, if you want good quality meetings, you want consistent consensus, then you need to make sure you're summarizing, giving everybody a chance to hear back what you think the decision was, so they can check in their own heads and agree and say, yes, that's definitely what we decided. I'm on board with it. So when we leave the room as a team. We made a decision together. We're not going, no, but that's what I said. No. That's what happens in reality. And we've got to get rid of that by having those arguments, having those discussions in the room. And mentor your CEO, have the time outside board meetings to make sure that they're being supported. They're helping them go through decisions or issues that they're struggling with. And that means you need to have a good, clear understanding and experience of the broader context of the business. Give the business the time it needs, so that 24/7 aspect. And self-reflect regularly. So after a meeting, it's a really good habit to get into. And I did it for a while and I stopped and I do it again, where I was actually going through some of my journals and looking back, what did I write in 2018, 2019, 2020 in various board meetings? What was I struggling with? What did I reflect that I could have done better? And that's been brought into a lot of the points in this conversation we've had today. And last but not least, don't take the minutes. Keep some notes. Make sure you know what you're summarizing, but rather let someone else take the minutes and you focus on making sure that everybody understood what was discussed and what was decided. So that's it from me. So my challenge to everybody is make a choice. Do you want to be just a good director or do you want to be a great director? The best place to be the greatest director you can be is to be the chairman, because you have the ultimate potential to add value. You're driving the team that's the head of an organization that can have a massive impact. So do that job with responsibility and do it the best you can. Quick blurb. So this was for our applied directorship program. I'll just put there's a couple of slides up just to give you some understanding of what we as a company can offer, and then we can ask whatever questions, burning questions you've got. I see there's a few things in the Q&A box, so we'll do those in just a minute. Excuse me. So we have a couple of options, one-day workshops, but for a chairman, probably the best one to have or go attend to is the applied directorship program, because it just fills in all the gaps. We go through a large amount of stuff that you need to understand, from strategy, culture, everything else. And this particular gentleman, Eric, had been on boards for years, many as a chairman, and he's just said it's changed the way I think. It's just filled in so many gaps, and I'm definitely a much better director as a result. So think about what you want to do as your training, whether it's our courses, the Institute of Directors courses, whatever it might be. My challenge to you is to make sure you're doing everything all the time to become a better and better director. This is a new career. If you've come from large operations before, moving into the non-executive director space is like a new career. So let's quickly look at questions. And whilst I'm going through the questions, Jenny, if you just stick the poll up, and if anybody wants any follow-up on anything, wants to spend 30 minutes on free consult with me, happy to do that, etc. Thank you for those who've put stuff in the chat box. Q&A. How is the situation of adverts for director opportunity, adverts, obviously, that is, that state requirements for industry experience handled as against the viewed as better to appoint directors in non-specific industry? So my argument in that case would be that the person who's advertising it doesn't really have a full understanding of how directors add value. So the standard recruitment process is we see what skills someone needs from an industry perspective. That's how we appoint executives. So if you're dealing with an executive recruitment company, that's going to be their first response, is to look at what skills you have. Whereas someone who's dedicated to recruiting directors will look at all of the other things we've talked about. So demonstrate your broad knowledge of understanding. Have you led a business? What kind of training have you done in governance? Have questions that they answer on how they've approached board meetings. Maybe examples of in the interview of how they've handled particularly difficult situations in the board meetings. Board meeting, not what your industry expertise is. It's important to understand if you're going to a board that's got fast-moving consumables to at least understand how that works, or going to mining to at least understand the sort of basic parameters that operate and the risks and everything else in the mining industry. But you can pick those kind of things up at the level you need fairly quickly because you're dealing with experts. That's why you spend time with the CEO, to learn more about the operation so you can fill in the gaps. So thank you for that question, Puppy. Michael, how well can a chairman manage the mood and tempo in a virtual meeting? Much more difficult, but in some ways I've found it easier because you can see everybody all at the same time. That's the weird thing. In a meeting, you tend to find yourself focusing on someone that's either in front of you or near you, and you lose track of what's going on with other people. But if you've got a grid view in a virtual meeting, I find it much easier to see who's engaging and who's suddenly switched their video off. Come on, Jim, please switch your video back on. You keep doing that. Have you got bandwidth issues? Is that what the problem is? It's important for us to see each other. However, whatever words you use to highlight that, but you can see someone's face all the time. Tempo, I think a virtual meeting is a little bit more transactional than a meeting in the room, which means you can be a little bit harder and people don't get as upset as if you were acting that way face to face, or maybe I'm just missing the feedback. But I find that a Zoom meeting can be a little bit more efficient because you can move people on, and there's a sort of general sense of that this meeting has a timeline, whereas face to face, there's some social chit chat, then we all sit down, we take too long, we start the meeting 10 minutes late, we have a long coffee break, we're all chatting over the sandwiches. You know, there's less awareness of time passing in that situation, where a virtual meeting is much more focused on getting the job done. I don't know if that helps. Because sometimes I have more questions in the boardroom than other members. How do you manage this before a dominated meeting? If you're finding that there is not the opportunity to get other people's voices, then obviously hold your questions back. If the problem is people aren't asking questions, then you probably need to have some kind of coaching or mentoring session with each of them. And I've been on boards where that's added massive value, where we found that one or two directors were very quiet because they just really didn't feel comfortable. They really just didn't know what their role was. So have some coaching either directly or even bring in someone else to coach them, because they've got a fundamental process they need to go through to unlock and their self-confidence and be able to stand up in that space. They're being, overshadowed too much by people who've got more experience than them. But meanwhile, we want the value of their specific experience, which we don't have, which is why they're in the room in the first place. Yes, but be very, very careful that you aren't dominating the room and trying to dig into why that's happening, because it's usually that other people are being too quiet often, and there's no one else asking questions, so you sort of end up filling the void. Do you have a tool to help qualify, identify the individual contribution compass of the board members? Yes, absolutely. So it's self-assessment, yes. So we've done it on the basis of asking more questions, and strongly encourage people to be in a space where they're not interrupted, where they can sit in front of the computer for the half an hour, 20 minutes, whatever it is, to take the test. And we also try and make the questions as difficult to game as possible. So even if you have really tried to game it, we then do a debrief afterwards when I can quickly pick up whether the profile is actually accurate or not. So that's how we counter it. But yeah, all of these tools, you can game it to certain points, which is why it's so important to have some kind of debrief afterwards to understand what's really going on. Was it state of mind? Was it wrong? Just not understanding how to answer the questions or whatever it might be. So thank you, Christina. Good question. Any other questions? Any other questions? I think that was Michael. If you're not on the call anymore, Michael, then by all means, listen to the recording. Jenny, maybe just make a note that we need to make sure that Puppy and Michael and Christina get copies of the recording or links to the recording. If that's everything, thank you very much for spending time with me. Thank you very much for clicking the survey on next steps. We'll be in touch with those who have said you would like more details on various options. And if you want to get in touch with me, just send me an email, arrange a meeting. I'm quite happy to do a free 30-minute consult just to talk about where you're at, what you're looking to do next, and see if I can give you some advice and guidance. So yes, thank you very much for your time, and I wish you a fabulous Thursday afternoon. Cheers for now.